Am I sure it's not COVID? Yeah. Look, here's something I prepared earlier. Here's a negative COVID test. Well, I've done like 4 of them.
first writer's challenge in the dorm room, so it's going to be quite a unique experience here. But we're just going to continue on with the writings I've been doing, or the chapter I've been doing, I should say. And we will go on from there. And I've done a little bit of work since the last time we were working on this chapter. Still the same chapter, chapter 1 of this novel series. And I'm going to be introducing really two characters. We worked on one character last stream, but I've added one more character from the sheet that we've done before. So we're going to update our campfire sheet as well, because we need to make sure we get everything on the campfire program so that we don't confuse any people or anything that will prevent those things. Definitely do not want that. So we're going to be adding that character. So this one's going to be largely a research-based stream as well as some writing. We'll see how long it goes on for. Don't necessarily have a time in planning for that, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we don't have things ready to go here. Looks like we're all good there. I have a monitor up with the stream, but it is running slightly slower. So I was making sure that the screens are caught up, and that looks to be the case. Just a little bit slower on that side of things. But anyway, that's all the technical stuff. We don't really need to be bogged too much into that. So this is the prologue of the story is fully written and probably not even going to be edited because it has already gone through the editing process. It's possible I can come back and change a few things, but that's not ultimately that's not the first goal in mind for what I am planning to do here. The first goal being, writing this first chapter. So, long story short, I am going to be reading the prologue and probably will put it on the YouTube channel under the same name. I have not done that yet, but that's most likely going to be the course of action. So anybody that wants to know what the prologue says can go to the YouTube channel to kind of see what stemmed from this story. Also, just as a quick introduction, this is idea number 1 of the story, and this is basically starting the chapter 1 all by itself and keeping the prologue as its original. The idea number 2 is expanding on the prologue and having that as chapter 1, and we would have to later go back and change the prologue into something that is completely original. I mean, the prologue is original, but I think you get what I mean. So, I don't think I'm going to reread the first chapter. I've already done that before we started here, but we're going to go down to kind of where I was working before we started this stream and added some notes. So right now we're working on this first point. We've kind of already described the houses, although I want to come back and change some details because I don't necessarily like all of the information I put in for the houses. It was a little bit rushed. It was a little bit rushed and a little bit boring in my opinion. So I want to make sure that everything is all good to go as far as the houses. So I am going to probably have to go back on the editing stages of what I am working on and fix the descriptions of the houses and make them a little bit more desirable, a little bit more interesting to read about and kind of really grasp the reader into wanting to know more about the instruction of the houses. So right now we're on to describing the villagers' farming situation. Now if we go to my research section of this story, Charles of Rome Research, as you can see from the title, I am basing this particular empire off of the Dover Castle in the United Kingdom. Now, I am not keeping every detail the same. It's just a inspiration point. But as I've said in earlier talks about this story, is that I particularly like things that did exist. In other words, real historical events I find more interesting than something that someone came up with in their head, because oftentimes what happened in real history is more interesting, more practical, and sometimes even more kind of fantasy-like than what someone could come up with in their own head. So that is one note that I wanted to mention. But also, Dover Castle, to anyone that knows their history, I don't know if I have a picture of it. Looks like I don't. But it's in one of the websites. I probably should go ahead and add a picture as well. But just on the outside of these walls and the mountain really to get up to the castle was an ocean. So the castle was on an island, and that was a very strategic location for the castle, and they had a very strong navy to go along with it. So it was hard to infiltrate the castle and take over the Dover Castle. So that is what this empire is being based off of. So because it is based around the ocean and around places to fish, there are two separate villager economies that would exist on this island. The first being fishing, and the second being farming, with the main production being wheat. So I started with the production of wheat, and so I was talking a little bit about that and how that would look while also describing the living conditions of the villagers. And we're going to see that compared to the royalty later on in the chapter. We may not get to those details in this particular stream, but that is kind of the bullet pointed list, as you can see here. So we have a lot to write about for the chapter to continue on, but it's all good to go as far as kind of what I planned out to write about. So, long story short, I wrote a little bit over the course of today and a couple days beforehand from the last stream, and just kind of describing, but we're going to have to do a lot more research to really understand and really to grasp the situation at which these villagers, these peasants, would be living under. So, to start off, I just thought I would read what I have written here. Today, as the sun grew to its maximum height, the village was moving rapidly to finish all the daily tasks that needed to be done. Some of the village went to fish, while the others went to farms, as defined by their manor lords. Nobody in the village was free to move about as they wish, as there was very limited in time to finish all the tasks. And I am going to have to go back and edit, of course, but anyway, I like to write and go back and edit, so there are some obvious errors, but we'll continue on here. Sir Leofric, the manor lord of East Village, was in charge of growing the wheat for the village as well as the castle. The village knew Sir Leofric by his very harsh and strict farming schedule that often left the villagers exhausted. The villagers that worked under Sir Leofric would wake up before the sun and go to bed under full darkness. Now, with its sun at its highest peak, the villagers knew there was only a few more hours of really workable daylight. Many tasks were left to do, including cropping and hoeing the fields to yield the wheat. So, that is what we have kind of written about so far in our story. And there is a lot more detail to add to really fit this into a situation that makes the most sense when talking over this story. So, essentially, we need to know how the crops were farmed in order to truly grasp the impact the villagers and peasants had to live under. So in order to do that, I have pulled up some articles in a video to kind of think over a situation that would fit the story, and basically more research the more accurate you're going to get. And not that I'm trying to write a fully accurate medieval story, but I am trying to make things make sense into the world and into the reality I am building for it. So we have a few websites and articles to go through. I think we'll go ahead and look through some of the articles first, and then we can move on to the website later on. So when we think about the situation of farming, there was very crude methods of farming for the medieval times. They didn't necessarily have super sophisticated tools yet in that time period. They didn't have tractors, for example, something that modern day farmers have, and makes it very easy to understand and very easy to, not understand, that's the wrong word, but very easy to go about doing farming. But in the medieval times, the only real powerful tool that they could use was an ox, and there was very limited amount of oxes to be used for farming, really. So, in other words, you couldn't have, hundreds of oxes in order to do the farming extremely fast. You had very limited resources, and that made the situation of farming a lot harder to do. So that is one thing to very much keep in mind when we are writing about the farming situation here. But we're going to go start reading from here. Farms were much similar then, and the peasants who have worked the land did not own the land they worked on. That's what the manor lord comes into hand. Peasants simply had to work their way through the ranks of life, and they could do so in really two major routes. Excuse me. They could do so through marriage, but they could also do so through working their way. Now, both of those ways came with challenges and weren't always true for both manners of life. That is something very much to keep into note when we are discussing farming. But long story short, there was an owner to the land that the peasants had to work towards. Hence why farming was called strip farming, blah 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 blah. The reliance on the local lord of the manor was also part of the feudal system introduced by William the Conqueror. The peasant family was unlikely to be able to own the most valuable of farming animals, an ox. That's what I was just talking about. An ox or horse was known as a beast of the burden, as it could do a great deal of work that people would have found impossible to do. A team of oxen at a plowing time was vital, and a village might club together to buy one or two and then use them on a rota basis. In fact, villagers frequently helped one another to ensure the vital farming work got done. This was especially true at plowing time, seeding time, and harvesting. Three of those being the most important part to farming, obviously. Without those, you would experience issues, and these weren't simply issues like first world issues. These would lead to very problemsome conditions and make things a lot harder to finish through, and that's something that is very important to note. And one reason why I'm harping on this a lot is usually when you think about medieval times, at least for me, you think about royalty a lot, and I've said this a couple times already, but you think of them having resources like ox or like horses to make things easy. But the true life that a peasant lived was very harsh, was very crude, and was very dirty. They were not clean individuals, not because of choice, but because they simply had to be like that. And that's just something that I don't think I particularly thought a lot about. And it is something I want to be a focus in my story, to really kind of describe in vivid detail the conditions and what had to happen in order to have a existing castle, an existing empire, and let alone an empire that is perceived to be at the top of their location, or at the top of their ward, or at the top of their kingdom, whatever words you want to throw in for there. I'm gonna take a quick water break here. The most common tools used by farmers were metal-tipped plows for turning over the soil, and harrows to cover up the soil when seeds had been planted. The use of manure was basic, and artificial fertilizers, as we would know, did not exist. Growing crops, was a very hit and miss affair, and successful crop was due to a lot of hard work, but also the result of some luck. In the summer, the growing season, farmers needed sun to get their crops to grow. The weather was a lot more predictable in medieval England. Just one heavy downpour could flatten that crop and all but destroy it. With no substantial harvest, a peasant still had to find money or goods to pay his taxes, but too much sun and not enough moisture in the soil could result in the crop not reaching its full potential. A spring frost could destroy seeds if they had been recently planted. The winter did not mean a farmer had an easy time. There was plenty of tasks to do, even if he could not grow the crops at a particular time. Some estates had reeve employed to ensure that peasants worked well and did not steal from the Lord. So there is our first article from historylearningsite.co.uk. We're going to go ahead and go to our research and write that down. We have already gone through some of these sites before, so we don't have to add all of the notes per se, but we are going to write some things. I'm just going to make sure I don't have a part for food and crops yet in this research doc for chapter 1. I see the Peasant Life. There we go. Poor Sirs. Manor. We have Manor talk already. We're going to put it here before the castle. I'm going to probably have to come back at some point and organize this note document a little bit better. But for now, it does its job, and doing its job is really all we need.
They're pants we're going to wear tomorrow, and the next day, and the day after that.
And tools. We're just going to name this food, growth, and tools. We'll bump this up to 24. Growth and tools, go back down here. Bump this back to 12. Turn off bold. There we go. Oxes and horses were not very common, and oftentimes peasants / villagers bought a a ox or horse with their group
I guess we all have future
money.
pants. They're pants we're going to wear tomorrow
They would
and the next day
then trade this
and the day
ox
after that.
around for each person to use. They had to pay their taxes to their manor lord, despite if the crops were good or bad. Farming took a lot of work and skill, but oftentimes luck was involved. Too much sun or too much water can leave the crops dead, while too less for each can also have the same results. We're going to spell check this real quickly because I know I had quite a few amount of errors in that particular writing, but that is all good because we're just kind of putting down our research, and we'll go back and edit all this, even edit the research document, make sure everything is all accurate and good to go. I also leave the link to any of the sites I have read through, even if I simply just read through it. It goes at the end of the document if I just read through the whole thing. But if there was something worth writing my own words on, or maybe even copy and pasting certain parts of the website, I'll go ahead and put that down and put the source, because I think it's just important to keep sources. Even if everything is all good to go, keeping sources is a vital part of the writing process. So there we go. We've kind of written as far as that article goes, but we have one more article about daily medieval life, but in particular we are focused on farming. So we are going to go ahead and look to see if we can find any components about farming in this particular article. We'll read the key points. I don't necessarily think that all are related to the exact thing we are focusing on, but it won't hurt. During the Middle High Ages, the population of Europe grew from 35 to 80. 90% of European population remained royal. That's an important note. Towns grew up around castles and were often fortified by walls. We know that. Daily life for peasants consisted of working the land. Life was harsh and limited dining and little comfort. All things we know. The women were subordinate to men in both peasant and noble classes, and were expected to ensure the smooth running of the household. Children had a 50% survival rate beyond age 1 and began to contribute to the family life around age 12. Keeping in mind that life expectancy during the medieval time period was also significantly lower than today, so that is one thing definitely to note. Terms, we know what a sickle is, I believe, but we'll pause it on this just to let y'all read through if y'all haven't heard of any of these terms, as we are going to go through some of these terms in the reading of this article. Okay. I don't think I saw anything noted in this first paragraph. The development of towns was an interesting thing, but we're focused on farming. So here we go. We'll start with the peasant life section of what we have here. Medieval villages consisted mostly of peasant farmers, with a structure comprised of houses, barns, sheds, and animal pens clustered around the center of the village. Beyond this was a village surrounded by plowed fields and pastures. Sorry about that, something popped up. I'm going to make sure I didn't miss it. Anyway, for peasants, daily medieval life revolved around an agrarian calendar. We're going to add that because I also mentioned this in the actual writing of the chapter 1. But we are going to mention this in more detail here, so we're just gonna write that, and we're gonna bold this because we're gonna have to go back in our document and change the name of what I called the calendar, because I couldn't remember exactly what the technical term for it was. That's one thing I've definitely noted, and I'm sure it exists in other genres of writing and in other just simply fantasy type, is there's a lot of research and thinking involved, but especially me placing it in a medieval kind of low fantasy style, I have to make sure I know all the terms and associate it right. Not that I'm trying to be 100% accurate. I think accuracy is definitely a good thing to have, but I definitely want to yield on the side of more accuracy than less. So anyway, so that's just going to be something to go back and edit on, and we still have to do plenty of edits for chapter 1. Okay, let's go back to our document here. Peasants that... One second, yes. Peasants that lived on a manor by the castle were assigned strips of land to plant and harvest. They typically planted rye, oats, peas, and barley, and harvested crops with a sickle or a reaper. Each peasant family had its own strips of land. You just said that. However, the peasants worked cooperatively on tasks such as plowing and haying. They were also expected to build roads, clear forests, and work on other tasks as determined by the Lord. So the manor lord plays a extremely vital role, and oftentimes this lord would be in lower leadership, so to speak, and could work his way up into being full royalty from inside the castle walls per se. Now the lord often did live inside the castle walls and controlled outside the castle, but I think everyone kind of understands the gesture of what could possibly be explored when you are discussing somebody from a lord, the lord of the land, so to speak. There's a lot of power in that title, especially since inside the castle walls there is very little to do with farming. They got all of their resources, all of their food from these villagers and from these farms, essentially. So they had to rely on them very heavily. So although you could say that he wasn't, say, pure royalty, he had a extremely high role to obtain and to live in. So that is something that is extremely important. The houses of medieval peasants were poor quality. We already have something on houses. The heating pads was something that was different from what we have seen in other articles and have written about. Excuse me. As I have mentioned before, I'm going to have to go back and add some more detail for the housing section, but I don't necessarily think that we need to do that right now. We can do that kind of in the editing and rewriting stage of the chapter. But getting the story together and getting some flow and getting some story structure and some story arcs and just kind of getting fully developed in this writing process is kind of what I am mainly focused on right now. And the rewrites and editing stage can come later, although they are a pivotal role for writing. We are going to pause our music here, and we're going to watch one of our videos from farming. I haven't watched any of these videos yet because I wanted a pure reaction, as well as just some more information on the exact details for what we are wanting. So we're going to go ahead and pause our music here. And we are going to go back to our YouTube. And we're wanting it for wheat because that is the product or the crop that I picked for this particular section of my story. Now, that's not to say I can't change it. That would be a very easy change to make. But for right now, we are focused on wheat, and many of these crops had the same yield of results. But yeah, I think everybody. Anyway, we're focused on wheat. So if we can find information about wheat, that will be the easiest thing to do and the most sense as far as what I think. We're going to resize our picture here so that we can get everything inside our picture for this full screen. I'm going to scoot this down, and then we're going to drag this here. We're going to make my webcam a little bit smaller. Alright. Oop. Not off the screen. Oops. Drag us back. Alright. Stop. We're going to move it like this. There you go. Okay. That looks good to me. So we'll play this, and hopefully it's a good video and we can continue on.
Hello everyone. My name is Klaus Kropp, and I am the manager of the so-called Lauresam Laboratory for Experimental Archaeology. First of all, I want to say thank you to XArch for this great opportunity to present one aspect of our ongoing research efforts at the Open Air Laboratory, as part of the UNESCO World Heritage Site Lorsch Abbey. This paper will be dedicated to medieval agriculture and how we seek to gain new knowledge using experimental archaeology. As part of an introduction, I first want to describe to you what the Open Air Laboratory actually is and what it stands for. Lauresam is a scale 1:1 model of an early medieval manor, including houses, meadows, fields, gardens, as well as livestock and plants. On one hand, it is following a didactic approach to explain manorialism, everyday culture, and crafts of the Carolingian era. On the other hand, it is also a research facility dedicated to experimental archaeological projects.
So I don't know if any of y'all have heard of this place before. When I first started to research my book idea, and I've always kind of been interested in history as a whole, but especially the medieval time period, this is something I came across a lot. And yeah, so I'm just wondering if anybody else has heard of this place.
Projects, especially to the field of settlement archaeology, indoor climate analysis, as well as agriculture. Please allow me some comments on the livestock as well as plants we use on site, as they are very important for the potential of our research. As for plants, we use old cereal varieties from seed banks, which basically give us an idea of regional varieties still in use until the first half of the 20th century. We also followed a selection of specific traits of plants in order to get closer to medieval appearances. You might ask how that's even possible, but in case of flax, for example, we have some preserved flax bundles allowing us statements about the branching of the stem, for example. As for livestock, we use old heritage breeds again, trying to get as close as possible to the medieval appearances derived from osteological evidence. Having all these animals, meaning sheep, goats, chicken, geese, as well as...
We're going to try to skip through here a little bit. We don't necessarily need quite as big as an introduction. I don't know if this is exactly what I was looking for. I think we're going to try to find something else. This is something I might be able to watch on my free time because this is interesting. But that wasn't exactly what I was looking here. Looks like this is a video game. We don't necessarily want that. We'll go with this one here. We'll see. We'll give him a shot. It's a different crop, but this is something that I can adjust to fit the particular crop that I am writing about in the story. So I think that this will work. So we'll go ahead and give this one a shot.
I'm in the middle of our hay crop, which will be feeding the horses this winter. This is quite similar to the type of hay that would have been gathered by medieval people to feed their animals over the winter. It's an absolutely essential piece of medieval harvest. I am surrounded by the hay we're going to cut with tractors. I am holding a modern scythe. I'm not very good at using the scythe, but I have used it a little bit. This is actually significantly smaller than a medieval grass scythe, but I'm going to show you a little bit about it later. This grassland though, I wanted to talk about it a little bit. We don't use any artificial fertilizer or weed killer or anything like that on this landscape. So the grass is...
As we noted in the first article, there was no artificial fertilizer in the medieval times. It was simply cow manure or horse manure or other more natural products, I guess you could call them, for how they kept the grounds fertilized and kept the grounds usable. Also in farming, still used today, you have different crops for different time periods. So you have your summer crops and you have your winter crops. And in the medieval time, they started to figure out that you can't always plant the exact crops you want every cycle because that kind of ruins the ground you are working on. So sometimes you had to use rubbish crops, so to speak, and like hay during certain time periods to get the crops back to where you could use them even better for the next year cycle. And obviously there was nothing planted that couldn't be used because everything in that time period was used, especially in the medieval villages. Maybe the royalty got better, meats or better vegetables or better just general crops or general products, but nothing really went to waste. So it is something that he was kind of highlighting and something that definitely needs to be explained upon.
semi-wild, and that means that for the horses, the hay consists of an awful lot of different types of grass, not just one type of grass. So all sorts of bits and bobs in the hay. Now for me, that means it's better for their diet. It's more variable. It's more like they would be eating and foraging naturally rather than just one particular type of hay. So this is probably quite similar to natural pre-industrial medieval hay. That's better for the horses. They perform better on it, we think, but it does mean it's a bit messier. I've had fellow farmers say to me, "Oh, your hay crop's looking a bit messy," and I go, yes, it is, because we've got all these other bits and bobs. Might be called weeds, but I think of them as herbs in the mix. So I'm quite pleased with it, but it does look a little untidy at this stage. We will cut these 26 acres for hay and have many, many bales of hay for the winter to keep the horses going. We, of course, are going to cut this hay with tractors and big machines, and it's going to be cut in a day, all 26 acres. In the medieval period, the hay...
It's interesting that he is... How do I say this? It's interesting what he calls the weeds, right? Extra flavor, so to speak. But it also makes a lot more sense. Farming during the medieval times wasn't as scientifically based, or didn't have as much scientific knowledge of how to properly do it. So it makes sense that he would be mentioning more natural elements. It would be more sight science, or it's more variable science. In other words, you see you doing you grow your hayfield in a certain way and it works, so you do it again. You may try to add option B into it and it doesn't work, so you know that you should no longer do option B. So it kind of works in that sort of way. Kind of sight science is what I call it.
The crop was cut usually around June, certainly by July, in between other parts of the harvest. And it was cut by hand by gangs of men and gangs of women and gangs of children. The men would be using the scythe, and they would form a row across the field and they would mow in one direction, cutting with the scythe itself and laying down the swathe of grass, which would then in turn be moved and sort of shaken out a little bit by the women following behind with hay forks. That would help spread it and help dry the hay. And then behind them come the children doing bits and bobs, tidying up, putting things in place. Hay cutting with scythes is actually really quite a physical task. And we see from the illustrations a lot of the medieval peasants, medieval workers, stripped down to their underclothes actually, which is quite amusing. Often their legs are completely bare. Quite often they've taken off their doublets and they're really scything in little more than their underlinen because it was so hot and so sweaty. In the medieval period, the amount of hay that a man with a scythe was supposed to be able to cut in one day was 1 acre, which is 1 chain by 1 furlong, or for those people that don't necessarily do the very old English style of measurements, 66 feet by 660 feet, which is actually quite a long strip of land if you think about it. And that 66 feet by 660 feet is actually designed that way because you're going to go in a straight line more or less for as long as...
That's a detail I do not know, so we're going to shrink this, go to our research document, and type that. So it was 66 feet by 666 feet for hay growing lands / fields. And I see the YouTube bots there. Welcome, YouTube bots. I guess it increases viewership, I guess. Does it count? I don't know. Anyway, we will also add that during harvesting, it was a family / group effort involving the men, women, and children. The men using the tools to flatten the crops, the women shaking the grass to dust off and dry, then the children to bundle and carry the crops once dried, once fully dried. It was also very labor intensive and could be done in low clothing due to the effort needed. There we go. Now we'll go back to our video and full screen it, and then we can continue on.
As you can. Rather than it being a square, it's quite an oblong. It's actually a 10-to-1 oblong. So if you think, it actually represents the shape of the landscape that would have been easier for a man with a scythe to cut, or somebody ploughing. You don't want to be turning around too much if you can possibly avoid it. You want to be steadily going in one direction. Now, interestingly, I almost think that an acre shouldn't be defined by measurements. It's actually a kind of working definition, if you like. So rather than saying it's an acre, you are also saying it's about 1 day's work. You're saying it's about 1 day's work to plough for one man and an ox. It's about 1 day's work for a scythe man to scythe down. So if you had a 5-acre field of hay in the medieval period, everybody would know that would take one man 5 days, or it would take 5 men 1 day. So it's a useful rule of thumb. And like most medieval or ancient measurements, they're not really designed for scientific accuracy. They're kind of designed to communicate ideas.
We're going to add that into our notes as well. Oftentimes the measurements of an acre would be used for a ratio of one man to the land. For example, 1 acre takes 1 man a day to plow, while 1 acre would take a few hours with 5 men. He had a little bit better example, but we get the gist. And go back to full screen, and then we'll continue the video.
So if you were to say, I have a 10-acre field of barley, everybody would kind of know how much work was going to be involved in sorting that 10 acres of barley out. Obviously, 1 acre of land could be very different in its productivity than another. So you have to remember there's good land and bad land. This field I'm standing in has good patches where the grass grows is very lush and very thick, and other areas that are a bit scrubby and don't grow particularly well. Even today, with the techniques we can use, that's still the case. There are good bits of land and bad bits of land. Farming in the medieval period was even more like that, I suppose. And undulating land or difficult land would be hard to actually mow or to scythe down. So the type of land you had would vary hugely, and the productivity of the land would mean that you could perhaps keep more of your animals alive over the winter. So if you had a good hay crop, well, you don't have to slaughter as many of your animals as you might have. If you had a bad hay crop, well, you've got to take steps to keep some of them alive, and therefore the harvest reflects what the coming season is going to be like and what you have to do. Once you had mown the hay will dry over 4 or 5 days. It needs to be turned every day. You turn it after the dew has evaporated.
These are off his measurements, but again, we're looking for detail. We're looking for vivid detail, not just basic. We're wanting to really involve the reader into our story. So things like this are vitally important. So would take 4 to 5 days to fully dry. Hay would be turned daily after the morning dew was gone. There we go. Now we'll go back to our full screen and watch.
In the morning, and sometimes you turn it again in the evening as well, just to make sure you're turning the wet side up. 4-5 days, maybe a little bit more, is what you need with sunshine, preferably a bit of wind, and it should make good hay, which is then stored. However, as the expression goes, you make hay while the sun shines. If it rains, the hay can be ruined. So you really have to time it quite carefully. And of course, June, in England at least, is quite unlikely to be very rainy, although people would disagree, and the clouds behind me look like it might rain. It takes at least 5 or sometimes 6 days to turn the grass into dry hay that's dry enough to store and keep over the winter. And of course, in medieval times, they didn't bale things in giant bales which were handled by tractors. Everything was put into ricks, put on a hay wain, which varied in size. As a small cart, probably pulled by 1 horse. You'd pack that on top and then take it somewhere and stack it. There are lots of different ways of stacking hay, but the basic idea was try and keep some of the rain off the hay and try and keep it off the ground and try and keep vermin out a little bit if you could. There were lots of different ways of trying to do that. One of the things people talk about is stacking the hay on stones to try and keep the damp from going up into the hay. The other is to put a thick bed of bracken, because apparently bracken doesn't really drag the water up from the ground, and apparently bracken is quite vermin resistant, that rats and mice don't particularly like chewing it. I don't know whether that's true or not, but that's what the books say. So there are lots of different regional variations on how to store the hay. But basically what you're trying to do is dry it and then feed it over time to your animals to keep them alive until the next spring when the grass grows again. Just as in farming today, the crop you get from your hayfield can be incredibly variable. It depends on the weather, basically. It depends on the sunshine, it depends on nutrients, it depends on the amount of rain and when it falls. And so on a good year, when you had a big harvest, you had a lot of hay and you could keep a lot more of your animals alive over the winter, because that's what hay is. It's a way of displacing the grass. So the hay crop was an essential component of the decisions you're going to have to make for the next 6 months of the year. I have with me my modern scythe. This is similar to a medieval scythe. They varied hugely. Like lots of agricultural implements, there were regional variations, and a scythe in Northamptonshire was probably very different from the design of a scythe used in Scotland or Wales or down on the south coast of England. So there is no particular standard scythe. The only thing that really they all share is the fact that it has this big curve which is very thin and very sharp and needs to be regularly sharpened, and it has this shaft which has handles, and the idea is your motion is to use your whole body, cut through, step forwards, cut through. So the action is a slicing action of the curve of the blade, And what you end up with is, when you do it properly, which I almost certainly won't be able to do, is a stack of grass on one side, nice and neatly piled. These, obviously the idea of a scythe touches on mythology, because of course death carries a scythe, and that was a big thing in the medieval period.
Yeah, we all know they were high on their mythology. We're just going to put our research. I'm just thinking of how I want to word this. I think we're going to put the scythe would be a long wooden tool with a wooden handle and a sharp curved blade that the person would use his body motion to cut the grass / hay. Each region had a slightly different look to their tool. We're going to copy this link before I forget. Okay. Now we'll go to full screen, where it's going to talk about the mythology behind the tool, and oftentimes the mythology was a key part.
The idea of the scyther of humans was a big thing, and you see that on illustrations on to do with heaven and hell. This device basically represents slicing things down, and for the medieval person would have represented sweeping away of the landscape. And of course, scything people down is a pretty grim way of looking at how death handles things. So a scythe is actually an implement for collecting your hay crop, but is also would have featured heavily on the paintings in rural churches, both to represent life and, of course, death.
Bit faster, do you think? Bit faster. 1, 2, 3.
I'm going to show you.
Good old Disney getting its ad revenue in there. Woohoo, Disney. So he's about to show us how he's going to use the scythe. And the mythology part I might put into the book. Obviously it is low fantasy, so there is going to be definitely parts of say unrealisticness in the novel from its true events and what happened. But anyway, I may go back and add those notes into the research document. Undecided on that. I'm not really sure if that's going to be the exact focus for what I am particularly writing.
Some scything and what it actually means. I am not very good at scything. I know a little bit about it. There are plenty of experts out there, lots of YouTube videos you can look up if you're interested in seeing an expert doing some scything. But I want to give you an idea of what it actually means. And I've always tried to do these things myself. So I'm going to do a little bit of scything and try and work out how tired I would be at the end of a full day of this kind of work. So let me have a go and let me show you what it looks like. The idea of the scythe is to get the blade as close to the ground as possible. So let's have a go.
It is a satisfying sound.
Well, I don't think I'm doing a particularly good job, but you can see how you can actually cut the hay. It's not close enough to the ground, but it's quite a workout. doing an acre of this would be quite tiring. Let me have another go. It's actually quite addictive. It feels like one of those Zen exercises where you probably ought to be careful not to do too much.
So we can kind of get the gist of what he's doing there. That does look a little bit fun to do, but definitely looks very exhausting. I'm just interested to see what the top comment here is. So we're going to wait for that to load just because of curiosity. Yeah, that's for sure. The top comment, yeah. Anyway, we're going to go and start our music again, and I'm going to take a quick bathroom break. Alrighty, everybody, I'm back. We're gonna resize this a little bit so that we can get back to our back to kind of our main focus here. Main focus looks good to me. All right. So we got a lot of kind of our information to do here, and we've just watched a couple of videos on the farming process and how they got farmed, so we're gonna have to add that to our description, as well as adding Lord Leo Fork. It should really be Lord Leo Fork, so I'm just gonna go ahead and change that now, make things more consistent. Leo Fork, they're out. They may be interchangeable in a way, and I mean, I don't think anybody would get too fussy if you do make those two terms interchangeable, but that's not really the first and main focus of what I want the story to be. So we're just going to change that to Lord there. That makes the most sense to me. We're going to write a little bit about the intensity it takes for the process. We're also not trying to write the as much. I have a tendency to start most / all of my sentences with the, and that can get very boring to read. I'm gonna give this a quick like. I like the vibe of this one. And y'all let me know if the music is ever too loud or anything. Despite the rising temperature and no clouds in sight, everyone knew the work had to be done or face punishment. We don't want to tell, we want to show. That's another key thing in writing. Don't tell, but show. So I need to think of a creative way to go about this section of writing. AGR. I definitely spelled that wrong. Trying to think of the best way to describe the situation, because I don't want to tell instead of show. That's not the major focus I want here. We're looking for something we could write as an example. We're going to look up some common medieval punishments. We don't want something where they committed a crime per se, but we do want something that's slightly more extreme than something that would just kind of get, like, say, a slap on the wrist during the medieval times. Obviously, changes in punishments changed between the two time periods. I'm going to move this so y'all can see what we're reading about. There we go. I'm going to answer this real quick. Okay, this is hideous ads, but so we got a few examples. that how you spell Penally? Harsh tax. Harsh tax. Penally. I don't think that that's how you spell it, but I guess it is. Alright, we'll go with it. See a notification. Want to make sure we don't miss anything. Alright, we're looking good. gonna get my charger real quick so I can still monitor. So we're just going to keep this up, but I'm gonna get my charger and mute the microphone just in case the chair decides to make a wretched sound like sometimes. Alright, we're back. Despite the poor hatred of Lord Leo Frick, the rich royal class saw him as a pure supporter of the royal highlands of the seas. This gave him a very good ground to stand on the social ladder of royalty, despite only being a lord. I like this one. We're gonna give this a like real quick. get a name for the guy who's in charge of the seas. Let's do this. Medieval name generator. We're having English. Is the Lord.
We brought levity to each other's lives, but there's a lot more to life than that, and I realized that in these last few years. And we just became very different people, and so we had nothing in common overnight. It's very strange, but that happens.
What are the seas? So now this is another person we need to add to our list. On campfire. But I don't think we're going to describe Isaac Howland yet, although that may make some logical sense. I think we probably should, actually. So it'd make a lot of logical progression sense, because you're going from one step to the next, to the next, to the next, to the next. So it would make sense a lot in that way. But I'm not entirely sure if we want that to be the first focus. right now, I'm writing it largely as a narrator would. Kind of, not in the character's writing per se, but as, a narrator. And, that is important. But, I don't know if necessarily that is the best approach to go with here. But we're still kind of brainstorming and thinking. He disappeared. That's weird. Anyway, let's see. I have to think of a good way to mention Catherine by name. As we basically have already compared it to the rich. We may come back and add some more details here and there, but I feel like that point has been satisfied. Can I have Catherine and Sue?
Not exactly clear whether they even truly exist, or could be shown to, in the physical universe. If they do, if one day physics finds a use for them, that's great. But if not, that's great too.
Just in case I forget.
That would mean that we have, with this brain, a tiny thing, a septillion times smaller than the tiny planet it lives on. Discovered something true.
Okay, we're gonna have to add it to our campfire. Stop.
If they do, if one day physics finds a use for them, that's great. But if not, that's
Okay.
great too.
So you can see, we're gonna shrink this. 1 second, guys. I keep running into this box. I'm gonna put that there. I'm gonna shrink that out. There we go. All right. So we have our campfire program here, which is fantastic for me because I often have time struggling to keep notes together and organized, and we have to make sure that we keep things organized. That's the only way the story is going to make sense and is going to be interesting enough for people to read about. So I'm going to put our names, but I just realized we need the name. Lord Leofric. Okay. Unknown Empire. Unknown Empire members. Extended. peasants. Same as great by royals. Invited to all the dinners and dances. I'm going to go to his attributes. Attributes. Go down there. Personality traits. Strict and cruel. There we got Lord Leo Frick. Now we're going to add Lord Isaac. Lord Isaac Howland. Go down here. How did I describe him? Okay. I think we're caught up on campfire. We need to put where this. I think we're safe there. So let's go here and save. We're gonna hit it twice just to make sure. Okay. To be announced. all those details. Quick water drink. Alright, I think I'm going to look for somebody to raid into. I appreciate all of y'all stopping by. I definitely look forward to another stream whenever I write next. I appreciate all of you guys very much. I'm just looking for somebody who we can go into. Looks like we can go into Element. We'll try her, see if she has her things open. We only have one. We only have one here, but that is a-okay. So we'll just go ahead and end the stream there. And I will turn off the music as we hit the button. I appreciate anybody who may have stopped by and lurked or anything like that. All of that is always appreciated, and hopefully we'll catch you on the next one. I believe I have it planned for Friday, maybe Thursday. I put it down in my schedule, but I plan to do either Thursday or Friday, and then another stream sometime later as far as the books goes. So anyway, I hope y'all have a wonderful rest of the day or morning, depending where you are.